Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest session of the BUZZ.travel Expo. And congratulations to the BUZZ.travel team coming to the end of what's been a real extravaganza of thought leadership and insights into our sector. Our next session is with Mr. Charlie Cotton, and the session is entitled Why Every Travel Business Should Be Committed to People, Planet and Profit. So to give a bit of introduction on Charlie, with a background in finance and economics, Charlie has worked for several years in tourism, helping companies hit growth targets and build ideas into profitable solutions. ecollective was started last year to help transform the way the industry approached sustainability. Frustrated by more talk than action, ecollective is designed to make positive, quantifiable change easy using data. So Charlie has promised he will not spend the next 45 minutes talking about plastic straws and climate change, but will share his expertise on how changing internal KPIs can drive commercial success and brand identity. So we will start off with Charlie giving a presentation. Hopefully then we will get into some Q&A. Please post these on the Q&A button, not the chat button, which has been disabled. And Charlie, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. So I'll start by just sharing my screen. So in today's society, it's more important than ever for the travel industry to focus on the triple bottom line. Hi, I'm Charlie. Thank you very much, Patrick, for your introduction. And as you kind of mentioned, I help travel businesses become more successful by firstly measuring and then improving kind of key performance indicators. Now, I wanted to start off by sharing something rather kind of scary with you all. The IMF recently stated that the global economy is going to shrink somewhere around 3% in their estimation, which will consider to be kind of on a global scale the worst recession that has ever been since the 1930s. So worst it's ever. Outlook is not looking positive at all. And I wanted to kind of start off by kind of focusing on some of the issues that we all face, no matter what our travel business is. And I kind of breaking this down into three very top levels that I come across most commonly in my work. So firstly, obviously, the big one, COVID-19, has had this massive impact on all of us, whether it be physically or emotionally, as well as financially. And I think no industry has been more negatively impacted than tourism. Everything's just purely been switched off, and things really aren't anywhere close to being back up and running. On a slightly larger but further term issue, we have the climate crisis, which is unfortunately going to get worse and worse as we miss deadlines and miss targets. And as we continue to miss targets and miss deadlines, the kind of implications of that are going to become more severe and more drastic. And we as businesses, but as well as consumers and governments, will be forced to kind of take actions to minimize those negatives that come from that, and they'll get more and more severe as time goes on. And the last thing I wanted to kind of go over was this outdated misconception about sustainability that I often come across, that this idea that becoming green or eco comes at a cost to the business or the consumer, which I'm super excited to kind of go on a bit about today and say it's actually no longer true. There's so many really good things that we can all do as part of our business that would make us more sustainable, but that don't have this cost element that's often considered in the past, or reasons why businesses haven't changed in the past. So just to quickly focus on this idea of the triple bottom line first. So John Elkington first pioneered this term as a way to measure performance. The idea was that a company can be managed in a way that not only earns financial profits, but which also improves people's lives and the planet. The exciting thing that is not only is it the right thing to do, but businesses who adopted this approach have outperformed traditional businesses over the last 20 years. This kind of first concept was pioneered back in '94. So there's been a few businesses who implemented it, and it's been 25 years, and there's more and more businesses applying this kind of methodology today, and the results kind of speak for themselves, which is really exciting. Even to the stage that last year, back in August, the Business Roundtable, this kind of association of some of the biggest companies in America, all signed up to make their business committed to making sure they benefit all stakeholders, not just shareholders. So that could be from consumers, employees, suppliers, communities, and so forth. So it's just moving from this concept that a business purely serves the shareholder, but wants a business that serves all stakeholders, including the shareholder. So this is a very simple diagram that at a very, very kind of top level really simplifies what the triple bottom line is all about. And this middle section here is what I believe all businesses in the travel world should be aiming to achieve. This kind of sweet spot where we have performance improving year on year, not just in profit, but also when it comes to our people-based KPIs, whether that's kind of loyalty within the company or the amount we benefit our consumers, as well as kind of planet-based KPIs, whether it's kind of CO2 emissions per customer or whatever it may be for your business model. That's really what we're trying to achieve. And it is very much, with all things sustainability, it is very much a balancing act. If you focus too much on one thing, it often potentially come at a cost to one or two of the different areas. But there is this perfect sweet spot in the middle that we have found in our projects, which can be achieved. And if you get that perfect balance, we see the kind of growth of that business accelerating quicker than if it wasn't focusing on all three, if it was just focusing on one or two. And the other thing I kind of wanted to make a stress on about was this idea that this is not just about becoming an NGO or a charity or becoming a kind of eco-warriors ourselves. This is purely just a ruthless business decision. We should all do this because we're going to be taking home, we're going to be achieving bigger results at the end of the day. By focusing on what are traditionally non-profit making parts of the businesses, we somehow manage to move the needle more on those profit KPIs. So why now? The first mistake people make when they think about this kind of areas, they think it's going to be laborious or super expensive, or the return of investment won't be there, or if it is, it's going to be there in several years away. But it just doesn't really stand tall anymore, that kind of way of thinking. The main reason why we should all be adopting this approach is no different from why we should have done it 20 years ago, or why we do most things in our jobs in our day-to-day. It's purely because it drives financial success. But there are other impacts as well that are coming as of today, which weren't so true 5, 10 or 20 years ago, that are going to force us to apply this method more and mean the kind of the reasons why are even stronger today than they ever have been before. So firstly, we've got this changing consumer group that are becoming more powerful in terms of their spend. Millennials and Gen Z are coming to the fore, and they're coming with different consumer preferences than previous generations. I could blurt along all day about all the different stats and case studies that have been done in the past, but I think this generation, more than any previous one, applying more of a conscious consumer base, and they've obviously grown up in the kind of information age where they've got more information to hand than they ever have been before. I was reading yesterday that Gen Z are more, or got told actually, Gen Z as a consumer base are more savvy when it comes to kind of consumer reviews than I ever have been before, in terms of spotting fake ones and only purchasing based on reviews. This idea that we're all talking and reporting back on products, and not just on the quality, but also other things in terms of how they're made or what was going on behind the scenes, has never been more at the front of business cases than they have been today. The most obvious reason why we as a kind of a travel industry need to be applying this approach is our key assets. We're a bit of a unique industry where our key asset is something we don't own. When we look at our websites or our brochures or whatever it may be, the thing that's often on them is something we don't own. They're these amazing, beautiful mountains. They are these beautiful beaches or this amazing coral reef system. We don't own these assets, but the very success of our business very much relies on the success of that asset. If we ruin that beach, it will have a direct impact on our beach bar or whatever your business may be. And we need to start focusing a bit more on thinking of that beach as part of our own assets, even though we don't own it. The kind of very success of those things are very much correlated. And then also, we've got this great situation of this kind of plan B alternatives. I think if I was having this talk 10 years ago, you could very easily come back at me and say, well, this is great, and we all absolutely believe in it. We want to do more for the environment. We want to do more for the people that are impacted by the business. But those plan B alternatives are just not cost efficient. They're not commercially viable for us. But now, because there's been so much innovation and so much kind of technological advancements in those plan B alternatives, that actually we've got this wealth of sustainable alternatives that we can start applying that we haven't done so before, because we've just done things as business as usual. But now there's this awesome opportunity where we can improve our product or improve our service, which benefits the consumer, benefits the planet, and benefits potentially kind of local suppliers and small communities that we may go and visit, but also it benefits the business because it might be more efficient or it might be cheaper. So it's kind of getting rid of this outdated idea that sustainability is this side-on business that we do on a Wednesday afternoon, or it's this thing that we have to spend money towards sustainability because we should do it. That is no longer true. And this last stat, actually, again, I only came across this yesterday, but I thought it was really interesting. It was a survey that was saying only 6% of us want to return back to the way things were before COVID-19 struck, which I thought was fascinating. This idea that I think in the industry we'll get a rush to kind of like, oh God, I wish things were back to normal. I wish things were back to normal. And I'm certainly have been thinking that a lot myself recently, but I love this idea that we can come back and build back better, to steal someone else's phrase I saw recently. This idea that we don't have to necessarily go back to business as usual, but we should kind of use this kind of terrible situation that we find ourselves in to think about actually, as much as we want to get back to business as usual as quickly as possible, is there anything we can change just to be 5% or 10% better in terms of our performance and when it comes to kind of the environmental side or the people side? So it's super easy just to kind of blabber on and talk about why we should all be doing this without kind of really getting down to what this means for us as an individual business, and kind of come up with examples that aren't really replicable in our own lives. I think the first thing to kind of mention is actually, well, tourism does have amazing benefits for the world. I think some crazy numbers like 1 in 10 or something close to that are directly economically benefited from tourism. It's a massive employer in terms of the whole kind of global workforce. It's great at kind of reducing inequality, getting money from the super wealthy to the incredibly poor. It helps in conservation. There's so many positives to tourism that we should all be super proud of. But at the same time, we shouldn't be naive and ignore the negative impacts that our businesses have, from whether it be kind of climate change or plastic waste or over water consumption or whatever it may be. I'm not here to say wag a finger at certain business saying you're bad and you shouldn't be doing this. I just want it to be a situation where we all accept the negative impacts that we have, and hopefully start to kind of persuade some businesses to say, well, actually, yeah, we do have this negative impact on our business as well as loads of these positive ones, and we as a business are going to be committed to reducing that negative impact year on year. And that's really what this kind of approach is about, and aligning by reducing those negative impacts. Where can we also find these kind of quick wins that benefit the business? Can we reduce CO2 and reduce our costs, but not at the cost or the quality of the product that we offer? Going on and stressing on a bit more about that previous point about how we don't own the environment, without kind of going on and on about it. But I think it's obviously pretty obvious that if we destroy it, it's going to have an impact on travel as a whole. And I think as a community, we all have to kind of take a bit more of a care. And it's not just businesses. I think I've talked to some really interesting people and CEOs of some major businesses recently who have mentioned how actually them as a business, all the employees are within it, everyone is super behind impacting the climate in a positive way, but actually it's the consumers that they feel are damaging in terms of when it comes to littering or pollution, and what can they do to what can they do as a business when it's actually just the consumers that are just acting poorly when they travel. But actually I think that again there's so much opportunity there to see how as a business we can influence the consumer behavior by being really smart in the way we word things or present things, and getting them on board as part of our kind of communities to get them to behave in a way that benefits hopefully their experience, but also benefit the kind of environment and other things that we care about in terms of our future business success. And then in terms of just examples of that why we should do it. I mean, obviously, the more amazing you look after your environment, the more it will stand out in the kind of Instagram age. I think we see this kind of rise of over tourism. I think it's partly down to this idea of how good Instagram is at selling places. These things look amazing, and people want to go to the best beach or the top 10 mountain trek or whatever it may be. But the more we protect it, the more it's going to do well from the sales point of view. And then from the opposite side of the scale, if we don't look after it, we maybe have our hand forced a little bit from kind of government intervention. If we look at Maya Bay in Thailand, the famous destination where they film the beach, they had to close it recently for a year, I think maybe 2 years. It may even be closed now. Actually, I'm not even sure. But they just said straight away, we're going to close it. No more tourists can come and visit this bay. The business here that rely on selling tourists on this particular experience, they're going to have to stop. And the reason for doing that was purely to kind of protect the environment so that it's still there in 10 and 20 years, and they can have a tourism industry based on that place and a long-term approach rather than just looking at those short-term gains. But we as a business all seem to have to think about, well, actually, if we don't look after it, we may have things forced upon us that we don't like. And there's a similar situation going on in the Komodo Islands as well, where kind of local small suppliers are trying to force the government not to kind of raise the national fees up to kind of thousands of dollars per national fee ticket because of the short-term negative impacts they have. But then the government is saying, well, if we leave things the way they are, this product is not going to be the same quality as it was in a few years' time, and we're going to destroy this natural habitat. And then when we look at the kind of the people sphere, to be honest, as an industry, I think we're already quite good at this. So we should be pretty pleased about ourselves, but there's so much more we could be doing. By incorporating kind of technology, even something as simple as Zoom, what we're talking on today, we can have a more transparent, more direct, and hopefully more kind of impactful supply chains. There's like a massive opportunity here to reduce our costs with leaner supply chains that will really kind of benefit local people and economies of the very places we visit. We take the kind of really quite kind of what you might look now as slightly kind of old school approach, where we have like the travel agent who then books the trip to the tour operator, then it goes to the kind of the international DMC, then it goes to the national DMC, and then it might go to a local service provider in a small village outside. There are so many people in this supply chain, it's a little bit crazy. And how can we make that supply chain leaner and more positive for the people who are actually delivering the good that you've purchased for your consumer? How can we make sure that these supply chains can get leaner and more direct and hopefully more impactful on the very places that our consumers go and visit and witness, and that should have all these positive impacts as well that go along with it, as well as just becoming cheaper for yourself. But then there's also other things like by focusing more on people, you have other benefits like your staff. Companies with purpose are often at the kind of front line of hiring the latest and the best talent out there. people want to be proud of the work that they're doing and working for businesses who have a purpose on some of these topics. And if I could challenge everyone and listening today to kind of ask themselves this question, is that if your business grew by 100% year on year, I'm sure you would be happy, but would everyone be happy? I mean, I'm not talking about competitors, I'm sure they won't be, but I'm talking about maybe your suppliers or local communities that you visit, or maybe even some of your employees. Would they be happy if you have twice the number of customers going to visit that place next year? Or would you, if you grew by 100%, is everyone in line? And that's some of the things that I come across on some of the projects where you've got a super motivated business and a super motivated team to hit these targets. They're really smart, but they're coming across these kind of small roadblocks of other stakeholders who aren't fully motivated behind their mission of growth or hitting certain targets because their thoughts and their process haven't been brought in to get buy-in from that mission of what that business is trying to achieve, because potentially that growth doesn't benefit them at the moment. So we have to kind of make changes in the business to make sure that our kind of growth and finance targets align with creating better lives for all our stakeholders, basically. And then the kind of last point I wanted to kind of raise was this idea that I know it's quite wishy-washy to talk about kind of people and the planet, and we should all be doing this, and we all kind of know this already, but kind of trying to make these KPIs on this subject is often quite hard. To try and make a particularly like a planet KPI. What does that even mean? We all know some of our trips may emit carbon dioxide, but then how the hell do you even measure that? I've got no idea how much carbon dioxide my trip does. So how the hell can I even start to think about improving it or reducing it year on year? But that's what I kind of want to stress, is that actually, obviously it's kind of what I do as a business, but even through me or through someone else, it's nowhere near as hard as people think to kind of start making these once were quite qualitative pieces of feedback into scoring systems or KPIs, whether it is CO2 emissions per customer or percentage of the kind of costs going to local communities, or kilograms of waste per customer that's produced. All of these things we can start creating a score by not too much work. And then once we've got that scoring system and it's super black and white in front of us, we've all got the team and the brains behind working out how can we reduce these numbers to benefit us as a business, as well as benefit the customer and hopefully the other kind of stakeholders involved in the business. And another thing, I keep going, but another thing I wanted to kind of stress is this idea of feedback as well. I think this is a massive opportunity we have for feedback. I think we do a pretty poor job of it, if I'm being honest, as a whole industry. You sell someone up to maybe a 1,000 or 10,000 trip holiday or whatever it may be, or even if it's like £100 experience, and you ask them how it was based on an automated email that says rate it out of 5 stars, and they kind of give you a reply and 4 stars. It's great in terms of just as a very top level, do we know it was good or bad? Do they enjoy it? Are they likely to come back and tell their friends or so on? But it doesn't really give us much information in terms of what can I change in my product to make it better next year? What can I really change there in terms of like changing one of the small ingredients that go in that can really make the experience better for the customer? But what can I change in there or take out, or what can I add to it that's also going to make this product benefit the people that it's impacted on, but also the planet? And that's where I think there's a massive opportunity to start working a bit more like some of the massive tech companies out there that are kind of going on this kind of path of global domination. They're just so kind of feedback based, and they get so much smarter feedback than we're currently getting at the moment, which I think is super interesting. And they've got ways to, if we can get ways to kind of implement that in our own system, I think we'll be helping us all achieve some of these bigger goals that we all want to achieve. And then the last point is obviously just something you all know again, but this idea that when people come home and talk about the best bit of their trip, it's always something to do with people or planet. It's always about this amazing beach we went to, or this amazing jungle we went trekking through, or these amazing random people that we met at a kind of a cooking class or whatever it may be. those are the highlights people talk about. So we need to focus a bit more on those particular moments that people really want to talk about, as well as share, and then kind of get the people talking about it. And then moving on to the main one, the big thing why we're all here really is that profit. So I often hear sustainability used in all sorts of things, used in completely the wrong contexts for businesses to make it hit their own agenda. Unfortunately, it is a bit of a wishy-washy word that is completely overused, not just in tourism, but every single industry at the world. The UN recently came up with this idea of the kind of sustainable development goals, these kind of big targets we should all be hitting as a global population, just as a business, but as a government and as consumers as well. And they could only manage to kind of narrow them down to 17. So it kind of shows how big encompassability is and how kind of vague it can be. But for me, my kind of understanding of it is it's all about kind of efficiency. How can we squeeze every single juice out of the resources that we have and that we purchase as a business to get every single bit of satisfaction and enjoyment and efficiency out of that resource, and the less resources we use to create value for the customer, the better it's going to be for everyone involved. And that's actually, I won't go on to that now, but there's obviously a big case about how we can use the kind of 17 UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, to kind of help us on this journey of going towards the triple bottom line framework. I think people need to stop thinking about sustainability as, or not necessarily stop thinking about it, but kind of having a slightly different approach to sustainability, where it's not just about an eco hotel in Costa Rica, or I don't know, a reusable water bottle that they sometimes give on trips and saying, oh, we're sustainable, we do that. Or as I say, we don't do plastic straws, we're sustainable. I think a lot of these businesses are slightly kind of missing a trick here when they think of sustainability. And they're not really seeing about how sustainability can be incorporated to just what they do, what their products are. There are some awesome businesses out there and other industries altogether. You've got like Unilever or Whole Foods who just embrace it as part of their business model and have financial rewards that are huge, and something that we should all be looking at. Is when we start to think about how we can make our own products more sustainable that benefit the customer rather than then we know we're kind of onto a winner. So it's this idea of the kind of me aspect of sustainability. As a consumer, how does this sustainable product benefit me? So you could take that reusable plastic, not plastic bottle, but that reusable water bottle and say, well, it benefits to you. It's going to cost you £20 a day, but it means you're never going to have to buy another plastic water bottle again, on the assumption you always have it again. So there's a financial reward. Pretty wishy-washy, and there are probably good arguments for and against, but that's the kind of way we should be thinking. How does it benefit you? I've seen too many instances of businesses saying, well, of conscious consumers who are willing to pay more for a sustainable product, but to be honest, it's not the main market. Most people get what they feel is the cheapest product for them, and if there's a more sustainable option that's more expensive, the majority of people are going to go for the cheaper option, and I'm certainly guilty of that myself. But this is where businesses need to think. It's about how can I make my product more sustainable that purely benefits the customer. We could look at one extreme side of the scale, like Patagonia, who makes jackets, and they say if you buy a jacket from us, it's going to be quite expensive, but it's a jacket for life. You never have to buy it again, and even if it breaks, we'll come in and we'll fix it for free. I'm not saying we have to go that far, but it's about how can we use some of the sustainable innovations that are going on today to make our products potentially cheaper or more efficient, and as I say, get out to provide more value to the customers. I think there's a really cool opportunity here to just basically be more efficient in what we do. There's obviously a marketing reason behind it. It's great for the brand to kind of present yourself as a sustainable brand, or say we are a brand purely with a social mission to do amazing holidays that don't damage the planet or whatever it may be. But the side area that people aren't really focusing on about how can we make our operations more efficient by using these sustainable practices, and kind of getting the consumer involved as part of that as well. The focus needs to go away from how we spend money, whether it's kind of 5% of profits go to charities, or how much money do we have to give to the sustainability team to kind of make it more sustainable. It should be about how we earn money, how we make the money from sustainable areas. And that, with that, I'm kind of coming to an end, and trying to summarize about why I think all travel businesses should be committed to people, planet, and profits. What I talked about was how, by focusing on areas that we do not normally put in our top priority list, sustainability often gets dropped to the bottom of the to-do list because of the whirlwind of day-to-day chaos. But by pushing that up the kind of to-do list, you'll have this big impact, not just on the brand, but also the business. We need to start measuring the kind of positive as well as the kind of negative impacts our business makes just from the day-to-day operations, so we can start to kind of manage them and set ourselves goals of kind of 10% improvement year on year. And that's what I find really exciting on the work that I do and I've done on previous projects, is by setting those targets on things that aren't necessarily obvious at first thought about how they were going to benefit the business or the costs. By focusing on reducing the CO2 or focusing on reducing people KPI, the kind of knock-on and side effects are all linked to profit, and it has these amazing knock-on benefits for all kind of stakeholders involved, which is super exciting.
Right.
We're not.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt your thoughts.
No, I was just going to leave with one last thing.
Right.
I just love it if people kind of leave who've been listening today, and thank you very much for listening. But I'd love it if they can just leave today and think about what their kind of personal biggest negative impact that they think their business may have. They may have a wonderful business and they don't have any, but if they do, I'd love them to think about what their biggest one is, and kind of challenge themselves to think about one. What kind of KPI would I put behind that, out of, like, you know, per customer or per annum? What's the size of it? And then how can I reduce that year on year without coming at a cost to the consumer, but actually benefiting the businesses? But yeah, thank you so much for listening. That's it.
Thank you, Charlie, and thank you for an interesting talk. Look, delving into the, as you say, the practicalities of this a little bit. I think, you know, theoretically and where you are, you're pushing at an open door, but it would be great to dig into some of the practicalities. And actually, to open up, I'm going to start with a question that's come up on the Q&A from our host, Jan, who says, Charlie, improve profits and reduce the ecological footprint, all good, but how? Assuming we are a hotelier or own a tour operator, how do we start? Is there an audit procedure with at least some standard questions and steps? So if you could give us some advice on the practical subject, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. A great question. So the first thing is a bit annoying. There's a no one size fits all method, and unfortunately there has to be a KPI that works for your business. Some businesses, based on their model, might want to focus more on CO2 emissions if they're a tour operator and they do trips from the UK to Australia. But if it's a hotel based in the Serengeti, they might not be too worried about CO2 emissions. They might be more focused on conservation and protecting the natural land that they sit upon. So what we first kind of do is be a little bit ruthless when it comes to sustainability. We say, look, we agree with all the kind of everything around sustainability. We've got all these different areas that we should all be making an impact on. But can you pick one particular area of sustainability, whether it's the climate crisis and focusing on CO2, or protecting local communities that you sit upon and helping their well-being, or it might be about education, or it might be about waste, and sit down and think, well, actually, what's really useful is if you go on the UN SDG website and look at all the 17, it kind of gives a clear list and breaks them down. But if I challenge you to kind of pick one or two of those and say which one really appeals to me just as a CEO or a founder, but also my employees, there's obviously an element as well as what was going to resonate with my consumer and do well for my brand. But which of those SDGs do I really want to have an impact on? And then by collecting your performance on that SDG, so if it is about climate change, you really do have to kind of focus on CO2 emissions per customer. But it might be something you have to be a bit more creative on. You might own a restaurant and it'd be about kilograms of food waste per day or something along those kind of lines. You do have to start measuring it, and there is a certain element of that kind of boring audit that has to be done in order to get this up and running. And everyone always kind of like sighs and goes, "Oh God," and no one wants to do an audit, especially if it involves getting suppliers and other people involved and stuff like that. No one wants to fill out a boring survey. But of all the work that we've done previously, there's always so many interesting results that have come on board, and everyone is always super behind it, and it always helps build a kind of community between all those kind of stakeholders. And then you'll be amazed about what these, if you're asking the right questions, what comes up in these replies. So yeah, I'm sorry, it's a bit of a rubbish answer, and I can't give you one or two real quick actions to lead today that are really going to tick both of those boxes in terms of make you more profitable and reduce your carbon footprint, because it really does depend.
If we focus, Charlie, on the, for example, on the CO2 emissions.
Yeah.
Let's take that as a starting point. I'm a CEO. I've gone through the 17 sustainable goals and said, right, you know, this is the one for me. How easy is it for me as a business leader to measure this? And how accurate is that measuring?
Oh, well, that's a very good question, and that's one that's like a hotly debated one in the industry and in the kind of carbon industry. So firstly, it's a lot easier for you to measure than you expect. A hotel is fairly easy because you've just got this one product. Ideally, you've got this one building, and you've got hotels, and you've got your energy bills that go in, the amount of electricity you use, the amount of gas or petrol or diesel you might use, and you have that all under your control. A tour operator for CO2 emissions is a little bit more difficult because you've got all these different factors. You've got your flight, you've got your transport from the airport to the hotel, you then got the hotel, and then all these different ingredients. But by asking key questions, you can collect pretty accurate results very, very quickly without getting really kind of stuck in the weeds. I think in terms of like making it real, I think if you just answered a kind of 10-minute questionnaire, you'd be able to get some pretty serious results for each of those ingredients pretty quickly, which would also be fairly accurate. Just to be completely honest and open about it, the results aren't going to be 100% accurate. There's no way. People are debating it at the moment about like the kind of what is the carbon footprint of a burger, let alone a 2-week holiday to South Africa. You're never going to get 100% accurate.
Okay, so what ecollective would do as a business is you'd come to me as a hotelier, or you'd come to me, and as a hotelier, I would fill in that audit and give it to you, and then you would measure my footprint for me. Is that the way it works?
Yeah, a little bit. We'd set up a KPI for you, so you can see as a business this year, next year, or 10 years time what it is in terms of your carbon footprint per hotel room, let's say. But what's interesting is when you get a bit more forensically into the detail, is you can see what resources you're putting into what fuel you're burning that's creating that CO2 score, and which ones of those come at a great cost to you as a hotel business or don't provide actually that much value to the customer. And that's what I do as a business, is I focus on those things we can change in that scoring system. So as a hotel, you're going to be obviously providing electricity and water and heating and all these different things, but there are going to be areas where you can be more efficient, and there are certainly ways we can get those bills down by adapting it for more sustainable technologies, or by just challenging what's been quite an outdated now view of what luxury tourism may be. I know this is quite an extreme example, but I've been lucky enough to work with some awesome kind of African safari lodges that are super uber luxury. Like, you can't believe how much they're charging, but they're just super simple, and they're kind of trying to turn the kind of idea of luxury on its head and say, well, actually, luxury doesn't need to mean private jacuzzis in every room, full on the latest air conditioning, Australian steak shipped over from into Kenya. It's about they're being a bit more creative and how they kind of provide a luxury experience for the customer by reducing their bills, but not coming at the cost of the customer. Now, they obviously still do things like, if it's unbelievably hot and sweaty and there's no other alternative, they still have aircon, because if they don't have it, it's not going to be good for experience for the customer. But if there are those options where we can turn something off or cut the cost there, that doesn't come at the customer expense and also saves us our bills, it's a win-win for everyone involved, and that's what we really focus on.
Well, interestingly enough, the first thing my wife does when she walks into a hotel room is always turn the AC off, because she finds it dreadful. But that's on both counts. But to that a little bit more, Charlie, and you talked quite a lot about the operational benefits of sustainability. If I'm a hotelier and I'm coming to you, I say I'm skeptical. What kind of savings can I make by undergoing a sustainability audit?
Well, to be honest, it's not going to make you a millionaire overnight. I don't want to like sell you a misplaced dream. The businesses that we work with before, we look and challenge ourselves. Me as a business, our kind of social aim is we make businesses more profitable by making them more sustainable. So on every project we work on, we have a goal of saving your cost, but we don't put a percentage next to it, because it does dependent on that business. But we'd always look to have around somewhere between 5 to 10%, depending on the nature of the business. And actually, rather confusingly, I always have like people or colleagues telling me like, oh, there's this great business we should go and work for. There's this super duper eco lodge based out in the outback of Australia or something like that. To be honest with you, I don't really like working with them, because they're already doing an amazing job. And actually, those kind of that opportunity to save costs is a lot smaller than perhaps businesses who haven't done this approach before. These kind of the eco lodges of the world out there, or the amazing responsible tour operators out there who already been doing this for ages, their kind of marginal gains of potential savings are not so big. But the ones who have just been doing business as usual for the last 20 years, or have always meant to do something like this but never have, their potential areas for savings are pretty exciting, actually, and certainly case to get everyone in terms of the whole kind of stakeholders super excited and looking. And
you referenced luxury a few times. Is what you're talking about mainly confined to the luxury sector, or does it straddle the whole industry? If I'm a budget hotelier, and but the whole budget hotel sector has grown immeasurably in airlines and hotels throughout the last 20 years. Are there sustainability opportunities here too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think firstly, this approach applies to everyone, no matter what your business is. The idea that we can all be doing better year on year, I think, applies to everyone when it comes to profit. Everyone wants to be making more money than they made the last year. But also, we all know we can be doing better on these other areas in terms of planet and people. When it comes to kind of that kind of environmental or people impact for kind of budget companies, they often say we don't have the budget, we don't have the kind of spend to have these massive impacts. But you look at companies like Intrepid, for example, or G Adventures, they're pretty much at the low end of tour operators. Their trips are fairly low. They'll call them high value, but they're low cost. But they're doing amazing work. Intrepid are doing amazing work in terms of calculating their own CO2 scores on every single trip, and then they're actually deciding to go, but they've been carbon neutral for several years, and aiming to reduce the carbon footprint of every single trip, and they feel they can do that on very low budgets. the idea is simple: the less fuel you burn, the less your CO2s are, and the less your costs are. And so it really works well for them. Airlines are the same. The more efficient airline you have, the less fuel you use, the cheaper your tickets will be, the more competitive you'd be. G Adventures aren't focusing on CO2; they focus on percentage of their costs that go to local suppliers, local operations. So the less middlemen in their supply chain means the more efficient they'll be, the cheaper they'll be. I think luxury almost has a slightly different problem. I think if you look at the kind of average CO2 score per room for a 3-star hotel compared to a 5-star hotel, the 5-star hotel is going to blow them out of the water. Luxury is this idea that you've got everything switched on. You've got these kind of super duper pools, you've got these massive rooms with aircon, all the works, everything, fridge. I mean, any hotel's got that, but you know what I mean. But they've got this awesome opportunity where you've got hotels like Saniva or the Brando in terms of implementing and bringing their customers on a journey. I think I was looking at the Brando yesterday. It's quite extreme. They have like people like Obama stay there, and they're located in the middle of the Pacific somewhere. I don't even know where it is, but they use it as a kind of brand piece to say, well, look, we're a hotel, we're not perfect, but we've got this amazing opportunity, and we're in this amazing location in the middle of the Pacific, beautiful beach, beautiful coral, but we're going to use this as an opportunity to kind of educate our customers who come here about climate change and what the impacts we all have, and how this is a massive issue that we all need to delve upon. So it doesn't necessarily have to be as simple as black and white as CO2 emissions per room and getting it down. A lot of businesses are seeing it more of a kind of a storytelling aspect to this kind of process. And
it is an incredible example, Charlie. I agree with you, and I sort of urge the audience to go and check out Brando's if you're not aware of it, because the story behind it and the storytelling is incredible. We're drawing to a close. I want to get in a couple of questions before we close. Again, there's another one from Jan here saying, Charlie, in what range are the ROIs on your projects roughly?
Great question. We set ourselves a target of getting an immediate return on investment for our projects we work on, so year one straight away. But what I'd like to see change in the industry, and I never like to kind of say someone else is doing something badly, because I don't want to be that kind of be negative on the industry. But when you look at other ways of becoming sustainable, such as certification companies that are going to charge you a yearly fee and say, well, you got to hit 70% of the tick boxes on this 160-page checklist, and we're going to charge you a yearly fee to do that, and all you have to do is just hit that 70%. What we do is give businesses the tools to say, look, we're going to come in this month, but actually we're going to leave the next month, and we're never going to come back again, because we're going to leave you with all the tools that you need to measure this yourself. I'm never really a fan too much of consultancies coming in saying you should do this, you should do that, you should do that. No one knows the business, your business, better than you do, and what makes your customers happy and what you need to do to make that happen. You're the one paying all those bills. You already have a pretty good idea of why you pay them. What we do as a business is try and make that super see-through in terms of, well, actually, this particular bill that you have here provides your customer this amount of joy, and it has this environmental impact. And then we can change this bill for something else that's going to have a much bigger value and a much smaller environmental impact. So it's changing those like-for-like ones. So we aim to have immediate response, but what I'm really excited about is that kind of long-term return on investment, and then kind of empowering teams to kind of reward for the more work they put into it, really. So we don't take a cut based on the amount of impacts that we have, because they can be pretty massive. But we look to have, in answer to the question, we aim to do around 5% year on year. So depending on how many years you go on for, and the size of your business, it goes on and on and on. But the cost that we work with is just a flat out fee from year one.
So you look at a 5% OPEX benefit year on year in working with you?
something so forth. I mean, we have that discussion, obviously, the first kind of meeting we have, and we're often honest about your business and your business model and where we can see impact and what that's going to be. I never want to work on a project where we feel we can't add too much value, because there's so many other businesses we could be working with. But something around that kind of figure, in terms of bringing, basically, the whole sales pitch is that becoming sustainable pays, and that's what we really focus on.
Look, I think it's important, because every business has ground to a halt. On this call, I'm sure would like to rebuild in a sustainable manner. Entrepreneurs will also say, well, what's in it for me? Is this going to cost me an arm and a leg? And if you can evangelize the message of, hey, not only can you get your branding right and do some good for the world, but you can also save yourself some money, and the capex on this won't be massive. That's a powerful message to get across.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a super exciting one as well. It doesn't just have to be in travel, it can be in any industry. But it's, I mean, I think firstly, I'm super lucky that actually everyone who I've worked with today and talked to in the industry are super behind it already. It's just about making it easy for them to make these changes.
And one last question, Charlie, from me. Where do you stand on carbon offsetting?
That's a really good one. I changed my mind a few times. Overall, it should be in no one's long-term plan to carbon offsets. No one should be doing it as a long-term plan. If everyone's first plan should be to reduce your own carbon footprint as a business year on year to zero, that should be everyone's goal. Now,
if I'm a tour operator, let's say I'm a tour operator,
yeah.
I think I can work with carbon neutral hotels, but I know my airline portion won't be, I'll never be able to get that to zero. Surely some kind of package where you work with them both can actually is better than nothing, effectively.
That's exactly where I stand as well. Some people are against them because they think it's gonna it provides people this idea of guilt-free holidays and so forth. But as long as you're firstly measuring, and it's a bit like a self-imposed tax. You as a business don't want to have to pay for carbon offsets. So year on year, you want to reduce the amount you spend as a business on carbon offsets to call yourself carbon neutral. And as long as you're doing that by making your business less carbon intensive, the better. So I do agree. I think it's a good short-term solution, because in order to carbon offset, firstly, you have to measure your carbon footprint, which many people don't do already. And then by measuring it, you just start to see these amazing quick wins of, well, actually, why the hell are we including that in our itinerary? It's super carbon intensive, and I don't even enjoy it. So let's get rid of that. And then, yeah, and then you've got that potentially that marketing angle to come out and say I'm carbon neutral.
Well, Charlie, I think we're drawing to a close. Again, I want to thank you so much for an interesting presentation and a nice Q&A. Thanks again
for listening.
With the ecollective business.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks so much for your time, and appreciate everyone listening.
All right, thank you to our audience there too, and have a great